Fantastic. Okay, welcome back everybody. And I want to also extend my thanks to Ian for your sharing in the interview there. Fantastic to hear all of the perspectives that you've brought into this discussion over this weekend. And now I'm honored to welcome and invite Mumpta Ito to join us for our next talk, speaking about nature rights. And Mumta is, as well as the founder and CEO of Nature Rights, is a lawyer and sacred activist, and is going to speak to us this afternoon with the exciting title, Nature Rights, Change the Paradigm, Transform the System, and Embody the Change. And as this weekend's been moving through that inner embodiment and how that reflects the kind of widened system change, I know we're all well prepped to hear what you have to share with us, Mumta. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's a real honor, and I must say that I'm very excited to be here, because when I started working with energy and activism together, I hardly knew anybody who was working in that way. And it's just so wonderful, you know, to be here today and to see, wow, there's a whole network of people, and this way of working is really catching on. And yeah, I mean, in my experience, all change happens at the energy level first. And if we can work with energy, with aligning energy towards our greater goals for the highest good, for humanity and for society, we can greatly accelerate the change and bring bigger quantum shifts. So I'm totally excited to be a part of the sacred activism movement, and to share whatever I can that can, you know, help to inspire and co-create what we're doing together.
Fantastic. And we're really kind of keen and excited to hear about nature rights. They've been mentioned a few times as well already this weekend. But first, would you be able to tell us all a little bit about your background and what's brought you to this point?
Okay, so it's quite a long story, so I'm going to try and get essential with the story. I started out in the spiritual path very fortunately from an early age. I was born into a family where my father was very, very interested in all things esoteric, and was a true seeker of how to become an embodiment of the divine. And during my childhood, my father explored many different paths, and he took us all on the journey with him. And I was fortunate enough to have been brought up in an environment where ritual and ceremony were very much a part of our everyday lives. So as I was growing up, I grew up also very connected with nature. I lived in South Africa as a child. That's where our family home was. And then I moved to the UK, and we moved to an urban environment, which was, you know, and I did kind of, you know, as most of us do, went through a phase of exploring the world in a different way through my teenage years, and came away from the ritual and the ceremony and the spiritual practice. But having had that in childhood as a base, it was something for me to always come back to later on when I found that I needed it. So in my journey, I started my journey in law, actually as a structured finance lawyer. I used to represent investment banks, multinationals, governments. And I found that as I was getting more and more successful in that, something inside of me was dying. My spirit seemed to shrink away. And there was suddenly one day that I woke up and I realized, you know, wow, where am I? Where is this essence that I've always known as me? I don't feel it anymore. And it was around that time that my father took me to go and see an enlightened being from India, who's based in Germany, that I'm sure many of you will have heard of, Mother Meera. And so Mother Mirror has this amazing ability to unblock people's energies by just looking directly into their eyes. And so I went and I received this amazing healing from Mother Mirror. I had the most profound dreams. And when I came back to the office after that weekend, it was as if the show was over. It was literally night and day. I didn't know why I was there anymore. Yet I couldn't just come out of there because my whole life was dependent on the income and blah, blah, blah. And so a process started to activate itself for me to come out of there. And I did quite rapidly. And when I came out of that world of investment banking, having had the insight that what I was doing was actually contributing to the problem rather than resolving it, I didn't really know where to go or what to do. And so I went more and more deeply on the spiritual path. Something in that meeting with Mother Mirror so profoundly reconnected me that I just wanted to go deeper and deeper. So I spent the next few years intensely in spiritual practice. I went to India. I spent 3 years traveling with Amma, which some of you may have heard of. She's another incredibly compassionate spiritual being who works tirelessly to uplift humanity. And I learned experientially with her over those 3 years, so many profound and deep insights came. And in the flow of all of that, my time of being with Amma on a close physical level came to a sudden end when my child was conceived. And I realized that even though in my mind I wanted to continue on that path, in my body something wanted me to nest. And so to honor that and to honor being a mother, we ended up coming back to the UK. And when my daughter was around 2.5, we moved up to Findhorn. And it was shortly after I moved up here that a rash appeared on my body. And whilst I went to go and see what to do about this rash, and I went to see a kinesiologist. And what came out of the session was that I had to put a project together that brings law and healing together. That's about shifting the paradigm upon which the existing system of law is based. And it's about the rights of all beings. And to go away and do a series of meditations, during which time I would get further insight. And to be honest, I was terrified to receive this news, because my impression of law was in those huge, big towers of what I would call the cutting edge of greed, speed, and aggression. And and the very thought of having to go back to those people and talk to them about healing terrified me. So I put off the meditations until the very last day in the time frame that I had to start them. And then I started the meditations and I got deep insight. And part of the insight that I got, part of what I saw was that the law, I saw an image of the earth with a dark web covering it, and the law was this web. And what I received was that the law held the human consciousness locked in a particular frequency, in a particular configuration. And in order for human society to be able to evolve to the next level, this web had to be infused with light. And I also got further details as to what was locking this web into that, and the seat of it, also, you know, where the seat of it was. And so as I meditated deeper, what I got was that the transformation of the legal system will come with a shift in consciousness of 1% of the practitioners. And so, yeah, so part of the guidance that I received was that law had to become more holistic, and to work with systemic constellations. So we did a constellation workshop that looked at the field of holistic law and where a change agent would be most effective. And what we found was that holistic law didn't really have a place until the law had to recognize all beings. And when the law recognized all beings, the existing system of law wasn't really equipped to deal with that. But holistic law was there to take its place. And so from that, I got this direct intuition that, well, we need the law to recognize all beings. And the first step is that we need the rights of nature in law. And I'd heard that it was possible for people to propose laws in the European Union, for citizens to propose laws. There was participatory democracy. And so I thought, okay, well, that's it. We're going to bring a European Citizens Initiative to ask for the rights of nature to be recognized in law. And as soon as I had that insight, it was like something in the field opened up. I started getting invitations to come and speak at conferences, and you know, and I hadn't really figured it out. You know, I was just following what was coming. At this point, I wasn't even so convinced myself. It was only in the process of following this that I started to see that everything that was coming to me in my meditations was actually factually true. You know, and so it was only through this journey that I ended up coming to the understanding of why what I received was right. And yeah, so this is how Nature's Rights started. What else can I say? I want to say a little bit more about law and why we need to bring changes in the legal system. But I think that's probably better when I go into the slides. But one thing I will say is that if a society was a living being, law is like the DNA. It's like the code by which that society expresses itself. And right now we've switched on codes for separation, codes for exploitation. Mm-hmm. And but the law doesn't have to be that way. We feel that the law is something distant from us, but originally, you know, there was law. All law is, and all it ever will be, is a set of agreements between people as to how we will govern our lives. Law governs relationships at its core, fundamentally. There was a brilliant quote by a guy who wrote a book called The Poor Had No Lawyers. And he said, we think we own the earth because the law legitimizes it by calling it property, but nobody owns the law. And this is what I really want people to get, you know, that if the law is the spoken word encoded, written down, and driving the way our societal systems operate, that drives the separation consciousness in our society, we need to consciously reclaim our power, and we need to consciously encode a different kind of law. Yeah, so Jonathan, shall I go straight into the slideshow about
Yes, please do.
Yeah.
I mean, absolutely beautifully explained kind of on that, and lovely to hear the introduction of that journey that you've gone through and how you've arrived at this point with it. So yes, please do. If you've, we're going to just do some screen sharing of some slides here. So just while we get that set up, everybody, sit comfortably. And I think here they come. Yes, we can see them there. Thank you, Mumta.
Okay, all right, that's great. So this is our organization, Nature's Rights, and as you can see, the strapline, transform the system. So quite often people think of the rights of nature. We have examples now. There weren't many examples at all when we first started promoting these ideas in Europe. But with the examples that we see, quite often I see the rights of nature taken to be just a litigation tool, just something that we can use to defend nature. But it isn't just a litigation tool. It's about using law as a vehicle for systemic transformation or societal transformation. So it's much deeper work, as I'll come into explaining. So this is our stance. There is no environment. We are the Earth's extended body. And so with this, what I'm trying to get at is that there is no separation. The rights of nature form the fundamental basis of our human right to life, yet it's nowhere acknowledged in the system. And our relationship with nature is our most fundamental relationship because it's our relationship to the source. Yet in our legal system, this is nowhere encoded, and this is why we have the problem. If we're to look at our current society as an iceberg, so everything that we see, all the negative outcomes, all the crises like the ecological crisis, the inequality and poverty, pandemics, ill health, the climate crisis, the food crisis, economic crisis, sixth mass extinction, they're all the visible effects. It's just what's visible above the waterline. However, what we don't see is what's below the waterline. That's the systems, the silo systems or fragmented systems and structures, the mechanistic paradigm worldview, the separation consciousness from which all of this emerges, that generates all of this on all of these negative results on autopilot. And of course, all of this separation consciousness sits on a bedrock of trauma. If we're to look at Europe, there's the burning of the witches, there's the enclosures, which was when property rights first came in. So prior to that, it was thought that, well, the earth belongs to nobody, and so it belongs to everybody. It belongs to nobody. Everybody is part of the earth. But when some clever lawyers came along and they turned it the other way around, and it became, well, if the earth belongs to nobody, then it's there for the taking. And that's how the enclosures came about. If you're able to exclude others from using the land, then you have exclusive use. And that whole idea of exclusivity, exclusion, extraction, came from this concept of property rights and recharacterizing that which is the source of life as something that can be owned and something that can be exclusively exploited. So this then got taken abroad in the form of colonialism, and very much of that mentality still exists today as the foundation from which upon which our society operates. Also paving the way for a lot of the laws, the WTO, all the ideas that fuel how the multinational corporations operate all come from this sort of property paradigm, as it were, which sits on a bedrock of trauma, of separation from the land. And anyone knows anything about trauma, you'll know that trauma causes separation, causes fragmentation, causes isolation. And that's what we have here, separation consciousness leading to fragmented systems and structures. If we look at how our society organizes itself, economy is dealt with separately to agriculture, dealt with separately to the urban environment, dealt with separately to environmental issues. You know, everything is treated in its own silo, and the law also operates in that fragmented way. So there isn't any joined up thinking. As a result of all of this, we get these negative outcomes. Now, all of our societal solutions, including environmental law, just acts to manage the crises. It just acts at this top part of the iceberg, the visible part of the iceberg, on crisis management. So the moment we put out one fire, or the moment we deal with one crisis, like say, okay, we have the climate crisis and we want to, you know, carbon is the answer, let's reduce carbon emissions, we still don't get rid of the separation consciousness, the mechanistic paradigm, the structures, silo structures and systems, and all of these other negative outcomes. And so we may eliminate climate crisis, but then there are other crises there as well, which are being generated in autopilot. So I call this the degenerative or the death cycle. And as we can see with this separation consciousness encoded in law, where law legalizes destruction by treating nature as objects, property, and resources, where law protects financial interests over life, and simply manages the externalities of the system without actually changing the root cause of the problem, which is the separation consciousness itself. And all of that then leading to the degenerative structures, what I call the degenerative structures, which is concentration of wealth and power on the back of property and corporate rights, which is what has led to that issue. Agriculture and food systems that poison the earth and people, economy based on infinite growth, energy that depletes nature faster than she can replenish, and so on, then giving rise to degenerative outcomes. And when we have, you know, all these crises popping up, crisis leads to more trauma, and more trauma then reinforces the separation consciousness again. And so we get this repeating in the degenerative cycle. So how do we get out of that? Well, we need to change the paradigm. We need to transform the system, and we need to embody the change. So if we look at this in the context of law, for example, in Ecuador, they put rights of nature into the constitution, but it was not integrated throughout the legal system. It was not, so it didn't lead to any systemic transformation. It wasn't embedded within the different policy areas. Human rights, corporate rights were not integrated within the rights of nature, or the relationship between all these rights were not, nothing was spelled out. And so we ended up, you know, by a paradigm shift in law was written in a document, but it was not implemented. And as far as embodying the change goes, if we look on the macro level in Ecuador, and where they were still carrying on with the activities that depleted nature, we can see the embodiment didn't happen either. And so this is an example of where, you know, just by changing a law, it's not enough. That law has to then be embedded throughout the system. And we need to be embodying the change, not just on a macro level in walking the talk of what the law is saying, but also very much on a personal level. Because in order to change a paradigm, we also need to change our own paradigm in how we relate to nature. Are we coming from the place of that we are intricately interconnected with every other life form on this planet? And Are we making laws based on the interdependence of all life? And are we living in accordance with those laws? And this could be, on an individual sense, there are two aspects to law. And the second aspect has been very much downplayed. So there's the written law, which has become increasingly institutionalized. And there's the living law, the customary law. And in our modern societies, customary law has almost gone out the window. But I say we should reclaim that, because if enough of us start to make the shift on an individual level, because we all are interconnected, that shift in consciousness will push the deeper shifts that need to happen in our societal systems as well. And so it's embodying the change we can all be part of by creating a new relationship in how we relate to the land, and then tying it also to a call for these deeper shifts in the actual legal structure, the DNA of how our society is supposed to operate. So if we look at the future society with nature's rights, so here we start with unity consciousness. And what gives rise to the unity consciousness is the healing of the trauma. Once we are able to integrate and to heal our societal trauma, individual trauma, collective trauma, we can all be part of the healing of trauma. A unity consciousness starts to arise. We start to see ourselves as deeply embedded within the web of life. And when we do that, we can start to make laws that see the human being as deeply embedded within this larger web of life. I call that the holistic paradigm, the holistic worldview, which then gives rise to whole system structures, which are integrated, where economy we see is not separate to agriculture, it's not separate to energy, it's not separate to environment, to the mass extinction of species. Everything is interconnected, and we start to work in a more interconnected way, which would then give rise to positive outcomes. So here, by encoding the unity consciousness in law, we end up at a very different place. So with this sort of an iceberg, we end up producing positive outcomes on autopilot, like regenerative economies, pandemic resilience, health and well-being, climate resilience, food security, thriving ecosystems, thriving biodiversity. And I call this the regenerative cycle. So here, this cycle also becomes self-reinforcing. So the holistic paradigm, we're talking about win-win situations, a legal system that is not adversarial, a legal system that is relational, that promotes healthy relationships with all of life. So whole systems and problem-solving approaches to law are also very much part of how I've been proposing nature's rights. When we encode the holistic paradigm in law, law acts to tackle the root causes of destruction, protects life over interest. So to give an example, say you have poor people who are cutting down a protected forest because they can't heat up their homes. The inquiry that would happen in the system, in the earth jurisprudence system that we are advocating, would be around needs. It would be, what basic needs would this person need satisfied so that they can heat their homes and meet their basic need for a warm home without having to destroy the forest. And it could be that maybe they need employment. Employment, maybe maintaining or restoring the forest. Maybe the government needs to give them a little subsidy to heat their homes. Maybe, there could be a myriad of solutions, but they would be the emphasis would be about looking at solutions where the whole system can win. So yeah, and then encoding the unity consciousness in law gives rise to regenerative structures, regenerative agriculture, regenerative energy systems, regenerative economies, which then give regenerative outcomes. And regenerative outcomes like thriving biodiversity, greater health and well-being, regenerative economies will lead to greater well-being. And greater well-being, when we're feeling good, we feel more open, more loving, more compassionate, more kind, and that reinforces that unity consciousness. And so it becomes a self-reinforcing cycle. So how does this work in practice? So last year we did a study for the European Economic and Social Committee, proposing a European fundamental charter for the rights of nature, and this forms the guts of what we propose to them. If we look at our current model for sustainability, nature, people, and economy, you have the three interlocking circles, and sustainability happens somewhere at the intersection. However, this model is intrinsically flawed because the circles are not independent. Because without people, there's no economy, and without nature, there's no people and there's no economy. So they're not equal realms. In fact, the only one that can exist on their own is nature. The others are utterly dependent on nature for their existence. And if we were to look at the legal framework, we have human rights for people, or rather the rights-based framework, we have human rights for people, we have corporate and property rights for economy, but nature has no rights. And also, all of these rights, the human rights and the corporate and property rights, are in adversarial relationship. They work against each other, and they've got to battle it out in court, you know, whose rights, who has the stronger right, you know. And but it's not equal at all. Firstly, because our legal system is one that is currently dictated by money, because it protects interests over life, and the people who have money who can pay for legal services are the ones who get access to justice. So it's not equal given the differing economic power between corporations and people. Also, the law has a predisposition towards the corporate rights because property and corporate rights exist in the realm of private law and public law. That means they are enforceable against everybody. Human rights, on the other hand, they operate in public law only. So that means that they are only enforceable against governments. They're not enforceable against corporations. And in the world that we have today, corporations are much more powerful than governments. So this system of rights really needs a complete reform. And so if we are to take nature's rights and drop it into this kind of system, we may end up with a scenario where nature's rights are not enforceable against corporations, which would be completely ineffective. So what we suggest is the nature's rights model. We say this reflects reality better because people are a subsystem of nature, economy is a subsystem of people. Because without nature, there's no people, without people, there's no economy. And without nature, there's also no economy. And so on that, when you map out the rights, nature's rights, human rights, and economic rights, we see that we have a nested hierarchy of rights. So quite often in the nature's rights movement, you hear people saying, you know, that nature should have rights equal to people. No, I don't say the rights are equal to people, because our relationship with nature is not brother and sister. Our relationship with nature is more like a mother and the fetus in the womb, because without nature, the human dimension, the physical dimension of our existence, you know, it's not It cannot exist. And even in the wider metaphysical sense, even our non-human dimension of existence relies on nature in the cosmic sense. You know, we exist within the context of nature. So, yeah. So this context of our existence needs to be enshrined within the legal system. Otherwise, we have a flawed system, is what we're saying here. But the context has to be in right relationship. So here, with nature's rights, human rights as derivative of nature's rights, and economic rights as derivative of human rights and nature's rights, we also have a system that is non-adversarial, that is synergistic. So if the rights operate in, if the rights are treated adversarially, as they are at the moment, you'd have an economic right that would undermine a human right, or you would have a human right that would undermine nature's rights. And when you do that, you unravel the meta system from which these rights come. Doesn't make any sense. So in our model, the rights have to operate in synergy with each other. So we get a relational and an ecosystemic reframing of the very notion of rights and how they're held in society, which brings it closer to the ancient wisdom concept of right relationship. So if we are to then take these three circles and make it three-dimensional, we can map out the UN Sustainable Development Goals on each of those circles. And if we add a fourth circle at the bottom, the planetary boundaries, we end up with a comprehensive framework for the implementation of Earth jurisprudence or nature's rights. So in this model, we have the economic rights, the human rights, and nature's rights corresponding, as we can see, to the different levels, the different circles, the different dimensions here. And as we can also see, the economic rights are embedded within the human rights, and the economy is embedded within the human society. The economic and human rights are also embedded within nature's rights, just as economy and people are embedded within the context of nature. And all of this is embedded within the planetary boundaries. And so this is one way that we can use existing indicators to come up with a framework for how to implement rights of nature in the society that we have at the moment. Now, some people have said to me, you know, rights of nature, nature's rights, you talk about a paradigm shift, but you're using existing instruments. Well, as you can see, you know, and I apologize if this is going a little bit over the heads of non-lawyers, but if there are any lawyers in there, as you can see, reframing the notion of rights by itself is a big restructuring in the legal system. And the way I'm seeing this is our first step. This is our first step to get the legal frame right. And from there, we can then start to create more innovative instruments that would then emerge from this unity consciousness. So, you know, so I'm seeing this as a first step that we're doing now. We're correcting this sustainability model, you know, we're correcting the flaw to make it closer to reality. But and after this step happens, naturally, more holistic, embedded structures of law will start to naturally emerge. And perhaps the full expression of nature's rights may be 7 generations into the future. But we have to start where we are at the moment. And I feel this is our starting point. Yeah, so I'm going to stop the screen sharing now. This is our contact details, by the way. And And before I stop the screen share, I'd like to invite everybody just to attune to the painting. This was painted by my dear sister who left her earthly dimension of her existence last year. It's an extinct elk. And just like this elk, the physical dimension of our existence is impermanent. Coming out of the elk's face is the Chakra Yantra, which is an ancient Indian symbol for the sacred universal energy pattern of life. And I'd invite us all to attune to this. Just like the elk, we are eternal, and just like the elk, our physical dimension is also impermanent. Just take a moment and just acknowledge the huge loss of life that this planet has seen. And also to connect with that dimension beyond, because it's only from there, when we really truly connect to the source of life, that source can then animate through us to create the future that is already here.
Beautiful, thank you very much. And that was lovely to have that little moment just to attune with that image as well, after you've taken us through all of those slides with the model as a whole. And thank you for going into all of the explanation of that kind of I can see from the comments there are people who may be wanting to bring into some questions to do with legal system with it, but from somebody who hasn't got a legal head, was really grateful for the walkthrough there to explain that. And so many comments in the chat of people very, very grateful for the clarity, for the inspiration, for the inspiring message that there is there with that model. I was wondering if I could bring some questions to you now from the chat.
Yeah, definitely.
Right. We got a kind of a few going on, so let me just kind of try and find them. There was some that I was noticing down. I mean, one of the things you talked about within the vision of it is that there's if 1% of legal professionals kind of get behind this, then that kind of will help the shift. But in the comments, there's a question about another 1% that we often talk about, often call it the 1%, of those who hold kind of the power monopoly and the wealth monopoly in the world, and kind of wondering how you imagine, how you hope, how you foresee kind of coming across that challenge of what this in terms of a systemic shift means for those current kind of power systems that we have.
So the way I see it from my own personal insight is that the power systems that we have in the reality that we perceive are a reflection of the collective consciousness of humanity. And I feel that it's the non-acknowledgement of so much trauma that leads to this kind of dynamic, this powerlessness that so many people feel, you know, the feeling of being controlled by other forces and not being able to do anything about it. So I feel that those structures will change when we heal. And the more of us that wake up, the more of us, you know, and even speaking out for these things can be a way of waking us up, you know. Yeah, even just you know, just doing our bit can be a way of bringing more consciousness to the issue. But I also feel that sometimes with activism, the activism can be linked to anger, and anger is not healed by becoming the anger. That just strengthens the frequency of the anger. Anger is healed when it is witnessed, when it is felt, deeply felt, and transformed into transformative action. And I feel that particularly when in the movement for for protecting nature, there is so much anger, understandably, because there's deep trauma, deep ancestral trauma in all of our people, that comes with that. And it's not in the past. It's as in the present as it is in the past, as long as it remains unhealed.
Yeah.
And so, yes, I feel that whenever I do constellation work alongside with activism, and what I've seen so many times is when the anger connects with love and compassion for all beings, it transforms into a much more powerful force. And yeah, I mean, the 1% exist, but I feel that they are merely a product and a reflection of where our collective consciousness is. And it might seem like a huge and daunting task, how do we change the collective consciousness of all these people? Or how do we get that 1% on board? I would say that we are primates, and there's the 100th monkey, a scientific study that was done, where there were a load of monkeys that were taught a new behavior to use a certain tool. And once these monkeys had reached a critical mass, they found monkeys everywhere on islands that had not even been in contact with these original monkeys that were doing this new trick. And, and I believe it will be like that, when enough of us get it, those structures will disappear. And I've seen that in the constellation. It was clear that the multinational was not a part of the new world. And, they just left. How long that journey takes is up to us.
Absolutely. And I think this echoes through a lot of what's been discussed over this weekend is, that first bit is what we can do ourselves, and then what we can do with our communities. And the more and more that echoes within the field and within the collective unconscious, the more that ripples out and becomes louder and becomes a bigger part of it and speaks through it. So thank you very much for that. There's a question here from Wing Yi, and I could partly answer it myself, but I'll let you answer it. What's nature's rights at COP26? And do you work with national governments and world leaders and to help them shift towards unity consciousness? I wonder if you can explain a bit more.
Yeah, so we were there at COP26. I spoke at the New York Times Climate Bar, and also met with the Ocean Race, who is an organization that I'm currently partnering with. So to tell you a little bit about what we're doing, we proposed a European Citizens Initiative. We took our draft EU directive for the rights of nature to the European Parliament. We held a conference that was co-hosted by 4 of the political parties, including the EPP, which is one of the big sort of mainstream European political parties. And we got a lot of support for the ideas. I was actually surprised and touched. We even meditated at this conference at the beginning, feeling our interconnection with all beings. All of the representatives who were there on the panel, and also there was the head of the European Environment Agency, the head of the IUCN Europe, And, they were all on our side, and they understood what we were saying, and they agreed with us. Some of them were actually very powerfully advocating, from their own selves as well. But what they said to us was that the timing wasn't good. This was in 2017, because the European Commission were getting rid of the nature laws at the time. So they said they won't be open to any new nature legislation right now. And, you do all that work and it will just fall, on deaf ears. So we suggest maybe wait until about 2020. And so that project kind of died down. And instead, we started working behind the scenes with the European Economic and Social Committee, who were very interested in the ideas. They proposed an own opinion recommendation to the European Commission, which was like around 2018, to include the rights of nature in EU climate rights bill. And the Commission refused they refused the whole climate rights. They said, oh no, we're already doing a lot. We don't need to do that. So they came back and they said, do you think rights of nature can deal with all of these other economic rights as well? And maybe this could be, because if they're going to always come back to us and say, we're already doing it, we need to propose something they're not doing. And so we ended up coming up with this idea for the EU Charter for the Rights of Nature that would integrate the economic rights, the human rights, in the framework that I presented. And that project is still ongoing at that kind of, working on stakeholders and institutional level. The Ocean Race approached me this year. They're a large organization who have been running kind of the cup in world racing of yachts or something like that for the last 40 years. They've decided that they want to champion ocean rights because the ocean is in dire straits at the moment. And so we've been working with them to create a series of summits. So as the race goes around the world, they're going to hold conferences on the different continents. And during these conferences, they're going to be inviting stakeholders and politicians and people like that to engage them around the discussion of a universal declaration for ocean rights and what would the basic principles be, with the idea of coming up with a set of draft principles to present to the UN in 2023, and then a longer timeline moving towards adoption by the whole of society by 2030. So that's another project. But so yeah, the European initiative, that one, and then another project that we started. We did a local project which was about the rights of the River Frome, and in the UK, and it took about 3 years all in all, a very long process, and eventually the UK government came back and said, no, we're not going to allow you. So unlike some of these other countries and towns and municipalities and other parts of the world where people have brought in the rights of nature at a local level, in the UK, we've got to apply to the government to approve it and or confirm it. And Secretary of State wrote back and said, no, we've already got environmental law. We don't need anything else. And this was in spite of the fact that there were reams of evidence showing that the system is not working to protect nature, and the river is in very, very poor status. But the law is such here in the UK that you can't do anything. So we thought to start another project on the back of that, the Nature's Right Zone. And this is where, a municipality, a town, a farm, a trust, any landowner, this could even be your own backyard, where people could declare their own land a nature's right zone. And and they would ascribe to a set of principles and then, and share their best practices. Now, you might say, what's the point of doing something like that? It's not changing law. Well, one, it's ceding customary law. So this is a way that, landowners can voluntarily say, my property rights are not absolute. They come subject to responsibility. They come subject to the rights of the ecosystems that are present on my land. And I choose voluntarily to respect those rights of the ecosystems and of the other beings that I'm sharing this land with. So it's kind of like putting a stewarding responsibility, in there. And how that ties in is when we speak with decision makers, quite often they say, yeah, but are people behind this idea? What would it look like in practice? And so it then starts to build up, a body of, we can say, oh yeah, well, all these people have voluntarily decided to subordinate their own property rights to the rights of the ecosystems, or at least live in harmony with them. And so it can lead to it leads to a shift, this kind of starting to get the critical mass in consciousness around the idea, together with just changing the idea is one thing, but when we actually do an action, it helps to make that shift a bit more conscious and a bit, it makes it stronger energetically. And so, so this is another way that people can be part of it. Because we've been mostly working with institutions and things, we've not been very public with our work. But that's going to be changing soon. And and when we're ready to go with the Nature's Right Zone, I'll definitely invite you all. Please sign up your land.
Absolutely, that would be absolutely fantastic. Because my question that's been kind of hanging there, just to finish us off as we are coming up to time, is what other ways can people kind of, while as you talk about this bigger systemic thing of changing the kind of perspectives with law, is a process kind of going on there over time, but in terms of what we can do individually, that would be a fantastic way that we could all get involved, and we look forward to more information on that. And in terms of where people can continue to keep up to date with what's going on, and when you say about kind of when you will be going a bit kind of more kind of public kind of outreach on what's happening, is there a website or something that people can?
So I'll give you the website address. You'll see there's not much on there at the moment. It's just kind of coming soon.
Super.
But if you subscribe, then when the website's ready, which will be not long, because we're in the process of, with the designers at the moment, we can let you know.
Excellent. Fantastic. And I'm sure I can kind of see from other comments, people will be really keen if any of those diagrams that you've talked us through are on there, that we can see those afterwards, if they end up on there, kind of part of the explanation.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, they will be. I found so many people interested in those diagrams and asking me for the slides and things, and I thought, yeah, I just need to get the website done and, and start to be more public with these ideas rather than just with, institutions and that sort of thing.
That fantastic. But thank you so much, Mumta, for talking us through that, for sharing that, for answering the questions. And yes, just again, honor you for your vision that you've brought into reality with this, and may it continue to grow and flourish, and may we see this change embodied in the systems that we have. But really grateful for you for joining us now this afternoon.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. It's been a real pleasure being here with everyone, and I hope to be a part of the Sacred Activist Network also going forward.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.